Welcome, my darlings, to my humble chateau. Please make yourself very comfortable. Relax your mind and release your imagination to me. I will bring you a story to entrance and entertain. Perhaps a frightening one. Perhaps a steampunk. Perhaps a bit of mythology. Anyway, sit back, enjoy, and subscribe to me. Night of the Dullahan, a Halloween Tale by Dustin Chisholm. Jenna was the love of my life. Meeting her parents wasn't the chore I thought it would be, but their stiffness and formality didn't instill me with a lot of hope. Everything they asked felt like they were running down a checklist, just the basic facts about me and my life. It felt like they were collecting the liner notes for a biography of me they were planning to surreptitiously write, and were more interested in observing us together. But all the while, she still insisted they would warm up to me. I was mad for Jenna, and her parents getting only marginally politer over time didn't stop me from proposing. She said yes, and soon enough Liam called to congratulate us, his tone slightly less formal than before. He invited Jenna and I to spend the weekend at their lake house because, of course, they had one. And when I explained how difficult it was to get the weekend off on short notice, he suggested I apply for a security manager position at a branch of his bank. Within a month, I was starting a brand new job that paid better and freed me up on weekends. Just like that, he let me in. Our wedding in the most lavish hotel in the city was like a dream. The month-long honeymoon across Europe was Liam and Meryl's gift to us, and was the last barrier between us and parenthood. 6 months after the wedding, the news we had been waiting for came, delivered in the form of a simple plus sign on an equally simple piece of plastic. The pregnancy went swimmingly, and I was beyond delighted to learn we were expecting twins. We had planned only have 2 or 3, so we were excited at the prospect of getting most or all of our pregnant days behind us, because those 9 months going swimmingly is still a relative thing. Jenna's screaming as Cole came was less than ideal circumstances to hold Wyatt, who had been born minutes before. But when her work was done, we each took our turns holding our perfectly identical boys. And then both at the same time, we reluctantly handed them off for their first night in the maternity ward in the midst of a chaotic night in the hospital. The blaring sirens announced the arrival of the first victims of a huge multi-car pileup. The wave of doctors and nurses running to meet the ambulances over a sea of medical jargon. It didn't calm the anxiety of new parents, but things died down and for a time were perfect. Things changed when Wyatt was a year old. He hadn't started to crawl by the time he was 10 months old. That was the cutoff time for when most babies had started crawling. He also seemed smaller and thinner than his younger brother. We took him to every doctor within 1,000 miles, and by the time the boys were 3, they had run every possible test. Wyatt showed no signs of poisoning, but he also showed no signs of any viral or bacterial infection or genetic condition. There was no obvious cause for his weak muscles, his susceptibility to every cold and flu that went around. The doctors basically said that he was generically unwell, was what I told Jenna, If he could identify it, he said it could be something new and he'd probably have a good case for naming it after Wyatt. It was the long unknown we hated. We simply didn't know if he would be ill his whole life or die young. We had many long talks, and we resolved to give Wyatt the best life we could. The boys got older, and Cole was a little maniac when it came to sports. It was like he got Wyatt's share of their energy and vitality. Both of the boys got good grades, but Wyatt was the shining star. He learned to read by the time he was 4 and was moved ahead a grade after finishing kindergarten. Walking on his shaky legs was a waste of energy, he thought, was better spent on scholastics. And that paid off. For her part, Jenna's attention towards Wyatt was like the orbit of an elliptical planet. Sometimes she bordered on being a helicopter parent. Other times she was content to leave him alone in his room with his games and books. She acknowledged this early on. It hurt so much, not knowing how much worse he might get. I wanted to chide her for this. Did she really think Wyatt might not notice? But it seemed like when she created a little distance, Wyatt just retreated into his books and his models, content to let her world swing back towards him when she was ready. And she always did. She seemed to want to favor Cole, but her love for our oldest could not be denied. During the summer, when the boys were 7, things took a turn. Wyatt started to lose weight and was bedridden most of the day. The doctors were still baffled. The only thing got me by was the lack of terminal diagnosis. As for how the boys got along and handled Wyatt's illness, there was one interaction that will tell you everything. Cole started playing soccer in 1st grade. We cheered our hearts out for him. Wyatt was often a little too weak to jump up and down as we did, so all he did was sit and clap. Cole was hurt when he saw this. It turned out he was worried his brother was jealous, and when Wyatt assured him he was not, they both agreed on a post-game high five to show Wyatt's support. I was proud the boys were so mature about it, even as I hated how maturity had been forced on them. But what I really wanted was for him to recover, to join his brother and all of his peers in the sun. We talked about baby number 3 a lot, but I didn't want to commit either way until we had an idea about the future. Liam and Meryl came by on Halloween. Meryl said she'd stay home with Jenna, watch Wyatt, and greet the trick-or-treaters, while Liam came trick-or-treating with us. Cole dressed up as Damien from The Omen. Not that we'd let him watch those movies, mind you. I had suggested the costume when he had said he hated wearing masks. So there he was in the suit, short pants and little cap. Jenna had applied makeup to make him look paler and added dark circles under his eyes. He was the most adorable spawn of Satan you ever saw. Liam was subdued. The burly man was usually bursting with carefully controlled energy. Granted, most of us weren't always so chipper these days, but he couldn't help but smile every time his grandson held up the picture he had brought to fill in for Wyatt. Wyatt had been planning on a bald cap and going as Professor Xavier from the X-Men. But when it became obvious he felt too ill to go, Cole volunteered to carry his little brother's little plastic pumpkin to get Wyatt his candy. Liam couldn't help but smile at how Cole explained the situation to the bemused homeowners at the 30th stop as eagerly as he had at the first. I don't see how any kid with Cole as a brother can't pull through just on shared goodwill alone, I said. I'd had enough doom and gloom for one night. Something primordial had stirred inside me. Some ancient perception, deeper than a gut feeling. Wyatt was going to make it. I think my optimism was contagious because Liam perked up an idea suddenly occurring to him. "Hey, Cole, you want to see a spooky house?" "A haunted house?" he asked eagerly. "Oh, I don't know about that," Liam chuckled. "Definitely spooky, though." He was on the council of the County Historical Society and had been raising funds to have an old crumbling mansion on the outskirts of town restored. The Pilcher Castle was a crumbling ruin, with the current owners unable to manage the upkeep. Liam had been able to raise the funds to finally restore it, a process only just begun. The shambles it had been reduced to lent to the house the haunted air ascribed to it, but it had been an imposing place when it was new. Pilcher, of course, had a legend of a builder, a wealthy Austrian immigrant named Christoph Pilcher, who had an affair with his maid under the noses of his wife and children. When the maid demanded he take responsibility for the resulting pregnancy, he had her murdered, only for his wife and their oldest son to return home early and find him standing over the body. He was imprisoned and hanged, but the story went that the maid lingered, crying for her unborn child. It was said she acted as a protective spirit for any children living in the house. Likewise, it was said Christoph's spirit now hated children, blaming them for his execution. Liam didn't tell Cole any of these stories. Pilcher Castle loomed ahead, all mysteries protected by the iron fence surrounding the acre of land it rested on. Liam had a keyring worthy of any medieval jailer in a movie. Appropriately enough, the gate was rusted and assaulted our ears with a heinous squeak when Liam opened it, gesturing for us to come in. The castle was not a castle, just an old Victorian with the entrance at the base of a tower that rose an additional 2 stories. 2 eye-like windows at its summit glared down at us, the glass reflecting the floodlights just enough that they appeared to glow. Liam checked his phone as we entered. He had been doing that a lot tonight. As he closed the gate, I saw him freeze, and I heard it a second later. Heavy thumps on grass. He relaxed when he saw that it was just horses on the property across the street, coming to the fence to investigate. "We shouldn't go inside, but we can get a few pictures in front," he explained. The city had installed floodlights to further discourage trespassers, so he had good visibility. I told Cole to stand a few feet from the porch and glower at the camera. "I'm not Wyatt. I don't know that word." Liam and I laughed. I was satisfied with a dozen pictures, and we were ready to go almost soon as we had arrived. As Liam opened the gate for us, he was checking his phone again. "You must have been the worst 'are we there yet' kid ever," I joked. His smile didn't quite reach his eyes. As we started to cross the threshold off the property, a sudden gust of wind kicked up, rolling down the country road. "Hey, Grandpa, look at the trees," Cole piped up. He was waving his arms to point at all the trees. Liam and I needed a second to process it, but when we did, there was no doubt. The trees alongside the road were dancing slightly in an unexpected breeze, but the ones enclosed in the Pilchard Castle property and any other nearby tree further down the road were perfectly still. It was like a contained tunnel of wind was running down the road in the direction we had come from. Liam's eyes went wide, but the terror on his face didn't come truly pronounced until he heard the sound of hooves, this time on gravel. "Sounds like somebody's horse jumped the fence." I was trying to give reason to calm myself because the fear so evident on his face was terrifying me. It was coming towards us from the direction of Liam's car, and through the wrought iron fence we saw it was a horse, but with a rider. Simply put, it was a man on a horse, but the details. Spiky black hair framed a bone-white face, atop a body clad entirely in black. And what a face! Eyes with black sclera and retinas, leaving only red pupils to regard us above a mouth as wide as a shark's, with stubby pointed teeth, chattering in anticipation. The horse itself was massive, and the man's unnaturally thin legs that matched the rest of his body hung over either side of the elaborate, massive saddle. Foam angrily ran from the beast's muzzle as the horse huffed, eyes the same red as the rider's. Liam immediately shoved us back through the gate, engaging the lock as soon as he was back inside the yard. Cole screamed and he tried to run. I had the presence of mind to grab him by the shoulders, and Liam immediately ordered us to get to the house. We stood on the porch, now trapped behind the fence that completely enclosed the property. But Liam remained where he stood. He was trying to be strong, but when he spoke, the panic in his voice turned my blood to ice. "You're not supposed to be here. This is wrong. You're wrong." But the rider seemed to be paying little attention to him, as he pressed a finger against the fence as one would stick their toe in the water to see if it was too cold. I could hear sizzling. The creature gingerly pulled its finger away to suck on the burn for a moment, before deigning to regard us. He pulled the knot on the kerchief around his neck, and the rational world I thought I lived in was destroyed as his head tumbled from his shoulders. There was no blood, and the body remained firmly astride the horse as the right arm reached up to catch the falling cranium. Grabbing the hair, it hurled the head over the fence like a shot put, and we watched in revulsion as it tumbled across the grass, coming to rest facing us, just a few feet from Liam. I held out hope that this was a trick, but then the eyes found us, and it spoke. It was a rasping, wheezy voice, as if struggling to pull in air to speak without being connected to lungs. "Where do you think you're going? Think you're doing? Trying to run? Trying to hide?" Liam seemed to understand what it was getting at, as he tried to answer, with about as much conviction as a child caught after breaking a window. We're not trying." "Oh," cooed the abomination mockingly. "Did you not know? Are you unaware? 'Twas a simple mistake, a silly blunder. Now I am here for my bounty. I'm here for my prize." That galvanized Liam. "Get inside," he roared. We listened. He had his keys ready to open up and let us in, again slamming a door shut behind him, letting us into a foyer with winding circular steps in the center, leading into the tower. The place was completely empty, and only a few sets of tools and building materials in the adjacent living room were evidence of the newly begun renovations. "Liam, what the fuck is that thing?" "The Dullahan," he replied miserably. "And how do you know that?" "I saw him when I was 7. On Halloween." When he finished the sentence, the strong, vital air about him that I had always known fell away as his face screwed up, tears streaming down his weathered features. The toughness vanished so thoroughly that it was as if it had been a facade. "What does he want? Why did he hurt that man?" Cole was weeping now. He won't leave until he gets what he wants. He may vanish if we wait and hide long enough, but he'll turn up elsewhere, sooner or later. His eyes were wide and distant, staring at neither of us. And what does he want? The eldest child of every generation, which he collects on their 7th Samhain. I'm so sorry, Dennis. Cole looked as if he'd gone paler than the actual makeup he wore. I'm not the oldest. Wyatt's older. I remembered the chaos of the night they were born, the rush of patients being brought in, and how perfectly identical our boys had been before being placed in their cribs in the maternity ward. Someone made a mistake, but the Dullahan knew. You knew. You were expecting him to come for Wyatt instead. Who else knows? He had left Wyatt alone with his wife and mine? He was really going to let this horror come to our house if they didn't know? But I refused to consider that. What was important is that we were here, and so was he. Please, we can't talk about this. We have to hide. Wrought iron hurts them, but they'll find a way in sooner or later. It was deflection, even if what he was saying was true. I opened my mouth to challenge him, but another voice cut me off. It was an unintelligible whisper, coming from right outside the house, not to our left and not to our right, but from everywhere and nowhere. As it passed, I could hear the Dullahan's head speaking softly from outside. We were all frozen, me holding my son tightly, Liam slumped and defeated against the wall. When the quiet returned, I was finally clear-headed enough to remember my phone. As soon as I dialed 911, I was answered with static, and a low moan rising above the crackle from the other end. I hung up quickly, somehow not surprised at this turn, knowing we were on our own. I risked a look out through the window next to the front door. They were all barred, same as the fence and the gate, but I was hesitant to get too close. What I saw could have been worse, but was no less terrifying. The Dullahan's head was laughing maniacally as the body rode the horse up and down the fence line. The black stallion was easily going over 30 miles an hour, and every time it reached Liam's car, he would swing his weapon, wreaking some new damage. The car was left in ruins, and he was also showing how fast he was. The message was clear. There is no escape. Climb the fence and I'll be on you in a second. He started to make the horse jump along the fence line, as high as it could. He was obviously testing to see if he could make it, and the beast couldn't quite clear those spikes. That was one way Providence was on our side, at least. Daddy, what's going to happen to me? Cole suddenly asked. It was a question his brother had asked me so many times. You'll go to sleep, Liam said miserably. It's just like falling asleep. Like what happened to my older sister and my oldest, your mom's older brother. Hearing him speak of the brother he and my wife had never told me about, I smashed my fist into his face. He felt like a house of cards. He looked up at me, the meager light from outside reflecting the tears welling in his eyes. There's nothing we could do. We learned that 150 years ago, when the rest of America spat on us Irish. We were desperate, and our family made an offer to the last of the Tuatha De Danann. Prosperity at the cost of the child, a generation, to be collected by the Dullahan. Cole was sobbing in the corner now. If he was feeling anything like me, he wanted to crawl into a closet or cabinet. but he didn't want to let me out of his sight. "We're getting through this, you hear me?" I was already planning. The lights out back showed a trail behind the house, and if there was a back gate, and the forest behind was too thick for a horseman. My plotting was cut short by an agonizing screech from outside. I returned to the window, and my stomach turned at what I saw. The horse was impaled on the fence, and was of the same ethereal, for it too was burning and sizzling. The Dullahan just had to slide down the beast's neck to enter the property. But before he did, he went to work. The elaborate barding was being undone, as the Dullahan's headless body had no trouble seeing what it was doing. And just like that, the body went limp, as the head floated away, its sparkling red eyes still keen and aware. Its rider stroked its stringy mane affectionately, as the body remained impaled and started to smoke. I could hear from the inside the bubbling as the flesh came undone. The Dullahan barely broke its stride to kneel and pick up its head, and as he stepped into the beam of a floodlight, I saw his weapon, a glistening, bloody human spinal column, with a real metal spike embedded in each vertebrae. The horse head glided past him, headed towards the back of the building. Why had we wasted so much time arguing when I could have cased the place and properly planned for a siege? I looked up at the column that contained the spiral staircase leading to the tower, and it had a shuttered door leading inside, made of the same wrought iron as the gate and the bars all over the windows. "Liam, if you want to redeem yourself, you can start by unlocking this gate." If this thing couldn't touch wrought iron, hiding in the tower would at least buy us time. The old man seemed to snap out of his daze and scrambled to his feet, the keys jangling in the darkness. But there was more jangling from the boot spurs stepping onto the porch outside, which preceded a slow, heavy knock. "Last chance to comply. Last chance to obey," the Dullahan wheezed. Liam's shaking hands tried one key, 2, 3, 4. Something heavy slammed into the door. The Dullahan wasn't wasting any time. After years of preparing myself for the death of one child, I was completely unprepared to deal with the storm of terror that threatened to drown me over this threat to the other. "Got it!" Cole tried to run, but Liam grabbed his arm. "Those stairs are falling apart. Be careful," he said. I ran into the stairway, trying to grab Cole from him, only for Liam to jerk him away and slam the shutters closed in my face, locking them before I could react. The instant I understood, the terror for my child's life only slightly outmatched the hate. Cole screamed and kicked, knowing he was betrayed. I screamed for him, and Liam backhanded my son, his beloved grandson, with one burly mitt. The hate I felt for my father-in-law obliterated my fear. "This way, Wyatt. We'll still have a father. I'm sorry, Dennis." It sounded just as hollow the second time. He sighed miserably and turned to the door. "It's all right. I'm coming," Liam said. The Dullahan sounded delighted. "That's a good boy, Liam. A sweet lad." I screamed and rattled the bars, useless, while Liam struggled with the 3 rusty locks. Despite my cries, I still heard it, the female voice drifting through the house, floating as if dust on a sunbeam. "Oh, you poor, sweet baby." I smelled a woman's perfume, and the lock to the shutter came open. Liam whirled around from the final lock as I barreled towards him. This time he wasn't so passive, and launched his thick fist towards my face. I ducked, trying to tackle him, but left myself wide open to an elbow slamming down onto the back of my head. A kick collided with my ribs, then another, then a respite. I lay there swimming in a sensory haze, my vision swirling like a vortex. But my vision cleared just enough to show why Liam had stopped. He was pointing the pistol he concealed carried at my leg. "Problems? Troubles?" the Dullahan queried from the other side. "If I have to shoot you to save your life." The sentence was cut off as he looked past me. His eyes widened. "Who are you? What are you doing?" Whoever he was speaking to terrified and baffled him in the way the Dullahan hadn't. A scream worthy of the banshee of Liam's ancestral lands came from behind me, and Liam responded in kind, backing away in terror, backing towards the door. The Dullahan seemed to have lost faith in him and broke through the wood protecting us. He put so much strength into the blow that he shattered a hole in the door, and the spinal column still had enough momentum to bury several spikes in Liam's head. All thought faded from his eyes, destroying his rationale and justifications, and his brain. As the Dullahan wrenched his weapon free, dropping him from the final time. The Dullahan went to work pulling apart the wood with both hands, and I knew I only had seconds. I dove for Liam's gun and lifted my groggy oldest off the ground. Thinking of him as the oldest was going to take some getting used to, and I vowed I would be calling him that to his face for years to come. I ushered him over to the shutters again and put him inside, locking it again. He was starting to come around, and I quelled my rage at his split lip. I blocked his view of his grandfather's body. "Whatever happens, don't look, okay? I love you, Cole. Remember that." And that was when the Dullahan pulled down the splintered remains of the door. In a long, sustained, splintering sound, he crossed the threshold, holding his head aloft like a lantern, those blood-red pinpricks scanning the inside like a security camera. But when he stepped through, his words weren't for me. "I told you not to interfere, not to meddle," the Dullahan snarled, speaking not to me, but whatever or whoever resided in this house. "You really think that will work? That will win the day?" The Dullahan seemed disappointed that this was the best I could do. "Don't come any closer," I ordered. "No need to." No doublespeak. And he said this with a hint of sadness as he nodded at something behind me. I heard the echoes of something massive coming down the metal stairs behind me. Cole screamed as I turned. The horse head was drifting down the stairs, floating down as if they were dandelion seeds coming to rest. Somehow it had climbed the tower and entered through the window, all the way up there. Cole scrambled away from it, but the futility of escape in that confined space was beside the point. It wasn't focused on him, but on the gate. It zoomed forward, smashing into the shutters and knocking them out of their frame. They slammed into me, knocking me down. I felt the wall behind me collide with my head. In almost the same spot, Liam had elbowed me. I dove again into that river, but it wasn't deep enough to drown out the sounds. The horse creature was screaming in agony now. having paid the price for striking its bane so strongly. Whatever it was made of, it smelled like ordinary burning meat and hair, and I registered it flopping and writhing on the floor of the foyer. "Thank you for doing what I would not." Then his voice was directed at me. "I suppose we both learned a little about courage tonight, eh, Dennis?" I struggled to my feet, fighting my body's urge to direct me back towards the floor. Focusing was a Herculean effort. A dozen figures before me became two. The Dullahan standing in the doorway, holding Cole's hand with one of his own, and his head by the hair in the other. Cole looked sad and distant. His eyes were wide, vacant. No, there were two of him, and my vision fully coalesced. A merciful act that revealed the cruel truth. Cole was laying prone just outside of the stairwell door, unseeing eyes facing the ceiling. But he was there, holding the Dullahan's hand. I understood and screamed madly, leveling a pistol at him, emptying the clip, but not making a single mark. "You can always get out. Always end the deal," the Dullahan said sadly, seemingly baffled at my grief and rage. The same wind that announced its arrival blew through the foyer of the Pilcher house. Both he and Cole faded away, a stain on the floor where the horse had melted, and my dead son and father-in-law was the only proof of what had happened. As I wept on that floor, I was joined by a woman's sobs. I ignored her. My world had ended. I was still there, holding Cole's now cold body when a passing cop saw the broken door. I was at the hospital hours later, and after the police took my statement, they put out an APB for someone with the Dullahan's height and build. Everything else they chalked up to the concussion. They were certain they would find a needle mark on my son's body to explain how he died without any obvious trauma. I didn't try to dissuade them. All I did do was tell the staff I didn't want to see anybody except Wyatt. He wheeled into my room, working his thin arms furiously to reach my bedside. Despite the effort, he launched himself out of his chair and onto me, sobbing. "I didn't mean it. I swear I didn't mean it." Hey, mean what? This was the first moment I pulled myself out of the grief for the sake of the child I still had. "When I prayed to be healthy and to give it to Cole if someone had to. I swear I only did it once when I felt really bad." I held him, shushing him. "The only one responsible isn't you. I know you loved your brother. He knew it too. So none of that, okay? As for the ones responsible, I didn't see Jenna until I got out, when I insisted on taking a cab home, not wanting to be trapped in a car with her for an awkward ride home. I found her in my office, seemingly having aged 10 years in 2 days. I did not hesitate. "Tell me you didn't know." The loss of a child was one thing, but she saw in my eyes she had lost more, and despair in turn rose in hers. "You don't understand. Our ancestors tried everything. We tried giving the child up for sacrifice out of the country. We tried killing the Dullahan or setting traps, but wherever we went, there it was. And whatever we threw at it, it just shrugged off. If only ever went away when it got what it wanted. It fell to me. I love you so much. I had to prepare you. I had to make it easier. Wyatt's sickness, I said. What came next grew in hysterics and desperation. I thought if you were prepared to lose a child, it would be easier for you. We still knew some of the old magic. I weakened him. I thought I should keep my distance. I tried, but I couldn't help it. God help me. I love him with all my heart. But I made him sick so you would be ready. So anyone who knew him would be ready. It was meant to end by the time he was 8. And the Dullahan would come before. When you said end, what do you mean? I meant it was supposed to stop. To let him get better. I swear I did it for you. I love you. I love both my babies. I didn't want any of this. And she finally broke down into hysterical sobs. The cries of Pilchard Castle's permanent resident sounded more heartfelt. These were just bays of a wounded animal. I wanted to hate her, but I knew it was more than love I had once felt that left me just pitying her. So all I did was reject her embrace and leave. I found the candy for trick-or-treaters in the trash. I was certain she and Meryl had been waiting with the porch light off and her front door unlocked. Wyatt told me he'd fallen asleep after we'd left and didn't wake up until the next morning. Drugged. I sat with Jenna at the funeral. I didn't know what else to do. I cried for things I lost, and I would still have if things had gone as planned, if I'd remained ignorant. Jenna's grief was equally palpable. I'm sure she'd been practicing for this ever since her parents told her the truth of her older brother's death. At home, Wyatt had traced his palms into a sheet of green and a sheet of black, Colstein colors, and cut them out. At the funeral, he shakily placed each cutout into his twin's casket. One last high five. But that wasn't the end. Meryl died almost a year later. One might say it was more like she had died of a broken heart without her husband. But that was not the kind of phrasing I wanted to ascribe to the Vances. And the worst truths were yet to be learned. Jenna and I were still living together. Lord knows why. We were starting to make amends because I understood she had been born into an impossible situation. That was the crux of our tenuous reconciliation. But then I found the enormous leather-bound book among the contents in the safe in Liam and Meryl's library while clearing the house for sale. What I hadn't found was a single picture of the older brother Jenna had never mentioned, for he was the child they knew was doomed. But as for the book, Meryl had left the safe open, so it was pure chance that I learned so much. Jenna had been looking for it, and the frantic questioning made me suspicious. It was lore from the Hallowdene Library, according to the cover. But the Vances had also inserted newspaper clippings. They were undoubtedly the death notices of every single child taken by the Dullahan. But something wasn't right. Each child had died at home on Halloween. That didn't add up with what Jenna had said about trying to run or fight the Dullahan. But then I read the book itself, and parsing through all of the Latin and Old English, I found the original contract, a crackling yellow parchment, placed between the final page and back cover. More slow reading before my heart stopped at the implications of the final lines. The gist was this. The contract gave the means to terminate the deal. To do so, an additional payment of a direct line's second oldest child of any current living generation must be offered. Can be collected on any Samhain. You can always get out. Always end the deal. Rage threatened to burst all the blood vessels in my brain, to boil my blood and blacken the skin above. They could have ended this hellish deal at any time. Either no one was brave enough to sacrifice themselves, or, worse, they were enjoying the money too much and thought one child a generation was worth it. With Liam dead, Jenna and Wyatt were the only two second eldest Vance children of the direct line alive. A year passed. Wyatt's strong now. He'll never be the athlete Cole was, but he'll be able to trick-or-treat for hours tonight. The 1-year anniversary of that nightmare that cost him his brother, my son. I slipped something into Jenna's tea before we went out trick-or-treating. She was asleep on the couch when we left, and when Wyatt was waiting outside, I pinned the small scrap of parchment onto her shirt as instructed before leaving. The last thing I did was leave the porch light off. My wife was only getting one visitor this Halloween. I'm not doing this for revenge. I'm not doing this out of hate, but because some small part of me still loved Jenna. I'm doing this for you, Wyatt, and for your eldest child, whenever they might come. So quoth this raven.
Blackbird entity. I never knew what it was. I hardly understand what happened upon those occurrences. But I know this, it wasn't natural. See, I moved into this home where the neighborhood was fairly desolate. I mean, between my home and the next, we're talking about 5 miles. It's fairly quiet, and I hardly ever hear the traffic. But I guess that's what you get when you want peace and quiet from the city. I moved in fairly quickly. To be honest, it grabbed my attention only because it was cheap. Besides the fact that the home was old, that didn't bother me. The owners at the time were an elderly couple, innocent looking type, but at the same time, very eager to sell their home. The gentleman was straightforward with me, telling me exactly what I needed to hear, what needed replacing and all. A leaky pipe here, an AC on the fritz, along with a few other small details that I thought were just part of an old home, a fixer-upper. Then again, I was motivated by the cheap sale of the property. I needed this. I desperately wanted a home away from the city. Plus, my budget was limited, and this was an opportunity of a lifetime. Well, so I thought. I remember back on the sale of the home. Everything was fairly quick and hassle-free. The closing costs and everything were paid by the couple. Something that should have raised suspicion, but my ambitions got the best of me. Moving in was a breeze. I mean, I had barely anything to fill it with. Coming from a small apartment with a dog. I had my friend help me move in, and eventually, out of the spur of the moment, they too moved into the old home with me. I guess it was a good thing, a good sign, now looking back. Something that struck me odd at first, upon the first few days of moving in. One of the rooms had a large black stain on the wall facing towards the side of the room. Something that obvious would have caught my eye. My friend and I inspected it. We thought it was just some mold buildup of some sort. But I recall the home inspector never mentioning such a thing. We decided to clean it up and throw some fresh paint over it. After a few weeks of making home improvements, everything seemed to settle in and fit quite nicely. My dog had been acting a bit anxious ever since the move. She would go back to normal after a treat and a few good belly scratches. She kept staring blankly towards the long hall connecting the bedrooms and the restroom. I just thought she was being weird at first, joking about it, saying the dog is seeing a ghost. Keep in mind, I'm a skeptic on a lot of things, including the paranormal. During the day, she would run quickly past the hall, only to remain throughout the rest of the day inside the living room, which ironically faced the hall. Every now and then, she would growl towards the direction of the hall. We would both look at each other and just kind of shrug it off. It was something that we kept in mind in the back of our thoughts. At night, the dog wouldn't go past the hall unless, of course, I forced her into the room with me. Eventually, I let that go by allowing her to stay in the living room. I got back from work one night, and I saw my friend sitting outside with his phone and my dog. I asked, "Hey, what's up? Why are you outside? Is everything okay?" He was frantically shaking, and so was my dog. He said he had awoken to my dog growling loudly. He thought perhaps it was growling at a cat or something. But that soon changed the moment he heard her yelp, a sound to which startled him. As soon as he ran out of his room to check on the dog, he grew quiet at this moment. A small silence filled the air, followed by a heavy sigh. "I just don't understand it, man. I just don't know what happened inside. I just know I don't want to go inside right now." "What happened?" "I came out of my room, and as I looked down the hall, there's this large black mass. I mean, it was something that covered the whole entire space of the hall. I couldn't look past it. And it moved towards the living room, only to pick up your dog. It shook your dog, and then it tossed it to the wall." I looked at him puzzled, yet a bit frightened by his words. "Are you sure you saw this happen?" He looks at me and responds, "Yeah, dude. Why the hell would I make something like this up?" "Sorry. I'm just trying to put things together." He continues to say, "Look, after seeing whatever that was, it shook the walls. I mean, it let out a scream, or a sort of scream or sound that simply scared me to the core. I ran the hell out of there. I ran past it and grabbed your dog. Then the lights inside the home, they all started flickering. And eventually they shut off a few minutes before you got here." We both waited outside for a period of time that seemed to be forever, contemplating on what little information was given. I wasn't brave enough to enter the home by myself. We both came inside and looked around. The place was a mess. Shit looked like a freight train pummeled through and then reversed back into it. The light bulbs were all burnt out throughout the whole entire home. We decided to just leave and then come back in the morning with bulbs and a clear mind. After cleaning up the mess and replacing the bulbs throughout the home. I noticed that inside the room I chose to sleep in, it had a dark stain again. It bled through the paint, and again I painted over it. My dog wasn't acting funny anymore, but she still wasn't going anywhere near the hall. A couple of nights later, I started to take some time to myself, and using the few vacation days, I stayed at the house and relaxed. I started to feel tired a lot. I would sleep to nightmarish dreams of a large black bird. I mean, this looked like a raven in a way, but off. It was huge, like a medium-sized dog, talons sharp and purposely displayed, as if it was using it as a gesture to instill fear in me. It would place itself in front of me, gaze intensely with its crimson eyes. I tried to look away, but for some reason, I couldn't. It was some sort of involuntary action forcing me to look at it. I dreamt about this repeatedly, until I simply wouldn't sleep at the house. I kept busy with things to occupy my mind. My friend, on the other hand, stayed completely away from the home. He wouldn't be there unless I was there. Eventually things died off, and a period of ease settled within the atmosphere of my home. And then one night, when my friend and I left to a party, we came back slightly intoxicated. He brought his girlfriend over and I went to bed. My dog slept beside me for once. As him and his girlfriend were watching Netflix in the living room, I awoke to screaming, which only intensified the fear factor levels within me to maximum capacity as I got up and swung the door open, only to see my friend being tossed across the room just like that of my dog, and his girlfriend screaming at the top of her lungs. I didn't know how to react. I stood there shaken, and then that black mass appeared in the hallway. It loudly let out a deafening, inhumane sound. Between a screeching bird and the sound of a group of people all yelling at one time. A sound that I can't get out of my mind ever since that night. It vanished as quickly as it came. My friend, on the other hand, was okay after attending to him. He doesn't recall a thing. His girlfriend, well, she never stepped foot inside my home again. The last time I saw this thing was about a few weeks ago, in a dream where I was being forced to look at it once again. Instead of seeing it, I see nothing but pitch black on the wall. The sun was starting to rise and shine through the bedroom window. As its massive size turns around and spreads its wings, it leaps towards the window. A window that wasn't closed. As I see it pushing against the heavy window screen, it rips through with its sharp talons. This thing flies away and disappears as if it was just dust in the wind. I woke up immediately afterwards, gasping for air, reaching outwards towards the ceiling. I look around frantically, thinking I just woke up from another dream. As soon as I notice that this wasn't true, as what I see next makes me question my own thoughts. I see on the windowsill, where it had escaped through the screen, a few large black feathers about 9 inches long. So my question was, so what was this thing?
Happy Halloween, my darlings. I hope you've enjoyed this little tale, this wonderful tale of the Tuatha De Danann and the Dullahan by Dustin MC. Dustin Chisholm. And thanks to Owl Daddy for his story and his help. He was going to be on my 500 special, but continues to have computer problems, poor guy. But he's here tonight. Please give me a like if you enjoyed this wonderful Halloween Tales. And if you leave a comment, I will do my best to comment back. Subscribe if you haven't done so. And ring the bell so you know when to come up and see me. And have a very spooky Halloween, my darlings.